Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Today's topic is Secrets of the Savanna on safari in South Africa. And it will be presented by our fabulous NatHab Expedition Leader, Lorraine Doyle. Lorraine, thank you so much for being here today and for taking us with you to South Africa. Let's go ahead and jump in.
Great, thank you so much, Sunny. It's lovely to be back doing webinars again. And yes, I think I decided that it would be nice to share with people some of the places that we go to when we do the secluded South Africa safari. And so that's really what tonight is about. A little bit about what savannas actually are, and then why they are so important, and then some of the really cool animals that we can see when we go specifically to South Africa's savanna areas. So this was taken earlier this year at one of the places that we stay at, which I'll talk about just now. So this is Kopano Lodge in Madikwe, and this is just some of the really amazing team that I have the privilege of working there with when we go on safari. So the savanna biome, what, where, and why. So just a very, very short introduction to the concept of what a savanna actually is. And it's quite a specific thing, this biome. So a vegetation type that grows under hot, seasonally dry climatic conditions, characterized by an open tree canopy above a continuous grass underlayer. And so I've highlighted in red there the things that are critically important to what actually makes a savanna, which I'll touch on a little bit more just now. But the fact that it has a seasonal rainfall, so it's not dry all year and it's not wet all year. It has what we call an open tree canopy. So that means there's trees scattered around. So they're not a closed canopy like you would expect in the forest. And then you have an understory, which is primarily grass, which is important for grazers that constitute part of the animal portion of what will characterize the biodiversity that we find in savanna ecosystems. So just to show you across the globe where savannas typically exist. And as you can see here, they're kind of what are known as they're almost transition zones. So between rainforests, and very often rainforests on one side and desert on the other. So you can see you've got the northern portion of Australasia, you've got a portion of India, a large portion of Africa, so pretty much everything north of the Sahara, with the exception of West Africa, where you've obviously got the Congo Basin, which is very much tropical rainforest. And then you've got the Pampas, and so on of South America. So all of these areas are what we would classify as a savanna. So essentially what happens in a savanna is, because we have this rainfall that is very seasonal, we get what's known as codominance. And what that means is that neither trees nor grasses dominate. So you have both. And because of that, it gives you the ability to have both browsers and grazers. And so that gives you this incredible biodiversity that we see when we go into these savanna regions. Now, whether that's in Australasia, India, or Southern Africa, or Africa as a whole, that same pattern holds true. So another thing that certainly in maintaining African savannas is fire. So these ecosystems actually co-evolved with fire. And what fire does is it regulates woody growth. So very often you will have a dry season, which is when you will have fire. And often that will knock back a lot of the woody material that might be starting to encroach, returns nutrients to the soil. And because you now have a removal of that upper story to an extent, you get more sunlight, which can then facilitate grasses growing. So I'm not going to go into the complexities of it, but grasses have a very different photosynthetic pathway to trees. And that specific photosynthetic pathway, it's called a C4 pathway, doesn't work well if it is in high shade. And so it's really important that you have these areas that are open and which fire helps keep open. And then the other one here is what are often known as edaphic factors. And that's really just referring pretty much to the underlying geology and the soil types that often we find in these savanna areas. Many of them are actually quite nutrient poor. And so that again has an impact on the types of vegetation that we get in these areas. And that's what is giving us these savannas as we know them today. So this is a map of South Africa. And I've put an elephant, a rhino, and well, they didn't have a leopard. So I'm afraid that's a tiger leopard. And I've used those to demarcate the 3 reserves that we go to as part of secluded South Africa. Because there are different types of savanna within Southern Africa. Not huge differences between them, but enough that we categorize them slightly differently. So the one with the elephant is what we would call an arid savanna. And I'll show you when we look at some pictures of Madikwe, you'll see how or why perhaps it's classified as that. So it sits right up on the border with Botswana, and it's sitting on the kind of edge, if you will, of the Kalahari. So it's not desert. It receives too much rainfall to be desert, but it is much more arid than many other areas, especially on the eastern side of South Africa. Typically in Africa, you will find that, or certainly in Southern Africa, the western portion of the country is drier, and the eastern portion tends to be more moist. So where the rhino is, I've called that mixed bushveld. And so that's really a transitional zone between arid savanna and what we would call low-veld savanna. So quite similar in structure to arid savanna, but it gets considerable more rainfall, and therefore it has a different plant and animal assemblage. And then when you go down towards our leopard tiger or tiger leopard in the low-veld, what happens there is we actually drop in elevation quite substantially off what's known as the escarpment. And so we get a much moister area. So it tends to be much more wooded. And we get what's often called woodland savanna. Nowhere in Southern Africa do we have the parkland savanna of East Africa. So I think one thing when people come on safari in South Africa that perhaps is a surprise is that we actually have a lot more trees in our savanna ecosystem than they do in East Africa. So East Africa is just huge open areas with the occasional tree. We have a lot more woody structure in our savanna, and that's driven by a number of different factors, but it is savanna nonetheless because of that codominance. So this is another map of South Africa, just with a slightly different take on it. So you can see Cape Town, which is a city known to many people, and then Johannesburg up in the middle of the, or sort of the northern portion of the country. And the reason I did this is I just wanted to show where the portion of South Africa, the secluded South Africa, actually goes to. So we fly from Johannesburg to Madikwe Game Reserve. So that's your arid savanna area. Then we have a drive which goes across the country to a little reserve called Marataba, which is actually part of Marakele National Park. And then we go on a flight all the way across the country, essentially east to Mala, which is the game reserve in that portion. And then we have a very short drive on the last day into the Kruger National Park before connecting with a commercial flight back to Johannesburg. So you can see that it's a relatively small portion of this area, which is almost more than a third of the country is actually falls into the savanna biome. But these three areas were chosen because they are, each of them has their own unique factors, some of their own unique animals, and it really gives a great showcase, I think, of the differences of the savanna that South Africa actually has to offer. So the first one, if you remember, this is the one that was characterized by the elephant. So this is a game reserve called Madikwe Game Reserve, and it's actually named after the Mariko River, which you can see flowing down the eastern portion. And it forms the basin on which this game reserve is actually located. So it's about just over 185,000 acres. And this was farmland until the late 1990s, when it was decided that it was very marginally productive. So this was cattle farm, but because it's so dry, it actually wasn't very economically viable. And so combination of private entity, local communities, the state, it was decided that the best use of this land, both for the people of the area and longer term for animals, was to create this game reserve. Now, bear in mind that this was farmland, and so all the existing animals that had been there historically had all been removed. And so the animals all had to be reintroduced. And there were approximately 8,200 animals translocated into the reserve. It was known as Operation Phoenix, and it remains one of the largest translocation projects in history of movement of animals anywhere in the world. So I've drawn a little, I'll put in a little icon here. And so that's the eastern, sort of northeastern corner where Madikwe Safari Lodge is located, which is the lodge that we stay at. And so a lot of what we do is concentrated in a relatively small section, eastern section of the reserve, which is characteristic of the rest of the reserve. So there's not a huge diversity in landscape across the reserve. It's fairly homogeneous. And so to drive from one side of the reserve to the other, if you were to go across country, would take you probably 6 hours. So focusing on a relatively small portion, but getting to see a wide variety of animals. So this was just to give you an idea of, when I talk about arid savanna, what I'm referring to. So you can see how red the soils are. So these are wind-blown Kalahari sands, very, very deep sands, and obviously extremely rich in iron oxide, which is what makes them so incredibly red. And as you will see, many of your pictures come out with this reddish tint to them. So I have colleagues who always tell me that my color balance is off, until I tell them that no, that's really the color the animals are, because of the pigments in the soil, which when any animal that dusts itself or rolls in mud will take on this reddish hue. So one of the things that Madikwe is well known for are its elephants. It has a very large elephant population. And as you can see here, this particular elephant is having a delightful mud bath. And as you can see, it's sort of going from a rather normal, as we would consider, grey of an elephant, to a rather interesting red as it sprays mud on itself to cool down. Again here, so you can see that wet or dry, elephants there tend to have this pinkish reddish hue, and that includes little baby elephants. So this is a real, this is a really tiny elephant, probably, I don't know, 10 months old, certainly less than a year. Still fits well under mommy's belly. And interestingly, when I spoke about elephants in my last webinar, would have no idea how that little trunk worked, and won't have any idea how to use it properly for nearly 2 years. So they can actually use it within the first 3 to 6 months, but to gain proper dexterity of that trunk actually takes them a lot longer. Sorry, I went back, I put a slide in the wrong place, but this is just to show you, this is a very typical tree and a special tree in this environment. It's called a shepherd's tree. And the interesting thing about this is that it's got a very high tannin content in the leaves, so not really eaten by many things because they can't tolerate the tannins. And so often it's the only really good shade tree in these areas, especially during the winter months. And so quite often during the heat of the day, you'll find animals sheltering under these trees because the temperature under them is actually a number of degrees cooler than it is obviously out in the open. So quite a special tree, specifically in this landscape. So there are some animals that we tend to find in some areas and not others. And this is one of those animals. So this is a brown hyena, and brown hyenas are much less ferocious than their spotted cousins. They're pretty much solely scavengers. So spotted hyenas can hunt for themselves. Brown hyenas generally do not. You can see these long shaggy coats, again, designed to help keep them, ironically, keep them cool in summer and warmer in winter because of that layer of air that gets trapped against the skin by the hair. And so these two were having a very interesting interaction with each other, but a very special animal to see, and typical of these much more dry, arid areas. So this is another animal. This is actually South Africa's national animal. This is a springbok. And springbok as well are animals found in our much more dry areas. So if you come down and you go across to the west of the eastern portion of the country, we don't get springbok there. It's just too wet for them. And in that environment, they are completely replaced by things like impala. Impala are much more capable of surviving in a whole variety of environments, whereas springbok are a lot more specialized. So unfortunately, springbok, even in places like Madikwe, don't necessarily do particularly well. The cheetahs have become particularly partial to them. So certainly not a guaranteed sighting, but certainly something that can be seen in this sort of more dry area of the country. This is just showing they have this really interesting ability to fluff up their back when normally they do this when they're jumping into the air in a activity known as pronking or stotting. But this one just interestingly had raised this portion of hair. And it's a display. It's to say, look how big I am. And it's kind of a showing off mechanism. This is another little guy who's specific to these much dry areas. This is a ground squirrel. So they live in these holes in the ground and have this really interesting ability to lift that tail and fan it over their bodies. And they use that as an umbrella in the really hot times of the year. So our largest bird, fortunately a non-flying bird. So this is an ostrich. Can be incredibly aggressive, actually, especially males during the mating season. And once more, something much better adapted to existing in dry environments. The chicks, if they get cold and wet, the chicks die very easily. And so hence one of the reasons why you find them in these much more dry areas than you do in moister areas. So cheetahs obviously occur across pretty much all of our savanna areas. But because these hotter, dry areas support less lions and leopards very often, it just gives cheetahs a better chance of survival. Cheetahs are at the bottom of the big predator guild. And so where you have high concentrations of lions or leopards, cheetahs don't do very well. So this is an environment where cheetahs have more of a chance because you have slightly lower densities of other predators. Another little cute antelope, which again can be seen in other areas, but it's actually quite neat because there's a resident family at the lodge. This is a little antelope known as a klipspringer, which literally translates into, it's an Afrikaans word, literally translates into rock jumper. And they can spring from rock to rock to rock, almost like a mountain goat. So you'll see that in front of its eye, it's got this dark area. And that's actually known as a preorbital gland. And so these little guys are very territorial. And to mark their territory, they will actually push a stick into that gland and leave a dark secretion on it, which actually is a territorial marking. It's quite a bizarre thing to see when they do it. Little males have got horns and the females don't. But yeah, a very cute antelope, which in Madikwe is seen quite frequently. Another little chap, this is a dwarf mongoose. Again, can occur in other areas, but it's just one of the smaller animals that's often very nice to see in these environments. So gregarious, lives in family groups, very curious, very confiding. So you often can get really quite close to them because they'll run away initially and then they get curious and then they come and stick their noses out. And then obviously giraffe occur in all of the areas we go to. But you can see here again, you can see the drier environment, a lot of thorn trees, quite scrubby. So yeah, just another picture, if you will, of arid savanna. And then just to show that you do get your big predators here. So a lioness having a bit of a yawn and a licking of her chops. And then a mom with some of her cubs. So just because I said cheetahs do relatively better here, It's simply because there's a lower concentration of bigger predators, not that there aren't any at all. And so these are what we would call mesocarnivores. So these kind of fit in the middle of our carnivore groups. So these are what we are known as blackback jackals. So also very nice little creatures to see in this environment. So then the next area that we go to is Marataba. And that was the one that I sort of typified as mixed bushveld, and I had the little picture of the rhino. And so Marataba means place of sanctuary in the local language, which is Tswana, which is spoken in a portion of South Africa and then also into Botswana. It's about 68,000 acres. And this is a privately run portion of a bigger national park. So if you look to the south here, you will see Marikele National Park. So there is no boundary between these two properties. The animals can roam freely between them, but humans can't. So Marataba has its own ecologist, it runs its own ecosystem, and Marikele National Park will be run by South African National Parks. So there's a lot of collaboration, but it's a good example of a very good public-private partnership. So this was one of our most innovative conservation models, and it was the brainchild of Nelson Mandela. And so it was created in collaboration with a Dutch businessman originally, who purchased the land at Marataba, and then subsequently the lodges were developed following that. So just to show you a little bit of the landscape, one of the really special things about Marataba is those mountains that you can see in the background. Those are known as the Waterberg, or the Water Mountains, sandstone, estimated to be about 2.8 billion years old. So extremely, extremely old sandstones. Also very red in color, so do contain quite a lot of iron oxide, but of a totally different origin to the soils that we see in Madikwe. So again, you can see here the hills or the mountains in the background. Although it's quite dry at this time of year, you can see quite clearly that there's a lot more surface water. And generally the vegetation tends to be quite a lot thicker than it does in places like Madikwe. So this shot was taken from the veranda of the lodge. This beautiful big tree is a tree known as a camel thorn. Again, a very special tree to both the arid savanna and this mixed bushveld area. Has amazing seed pods that it produces, which are highly sought after by all sorts of animals. So yeah, one of the iconic tree species of these areas. So one little chap, one of my favorite animals that occurs here, and the only place that we have the possibility to see it on the safari is at Marataba, is this little guy called a bat-eared fox. And what it does is it uses those enormous ears to actually listen for insect movement underground. So it will walk along with its ears pointing down towards the ground, will hear movement underground, and will then start digging, often looking for things like termites, beetles, grubs, those sorts of things. Live in little family groups and usually come out at dawn and dusk. So I just love their huge ears and their little Zorro mask, and the fact that they really are quite a special animal to see, and very few places that you actually do get to see them. Another animal that there is the potential to see at Marataba is this animal called an eland or eland. Pretty much our largest antelope, extremely shy, and so not often seen, but the possibility to see them exists. So they do occur in Madikwe as well. They are an animal of these much drier areas because they're very, very prone to tick-borne diseases. But yes, certainly something that there is a possibility to see, although not frequently seen. So what happened, this was also previously farmland, and the farmers here had dammed the Matlabas River. And so what that does is it gives an area of river that is maintained throughout the year. And so that allows for animals like hippos to be viewed on safari. So very interesting animals, actually incredibly dangerous in the wrong environment. And by that I mean you certainly don't want to trap a hippo between yourself and the water, because it only knows one thing, and that's to go over the top of you. But in this environment, in the water at a safe distance, you know, they are perfectly safe to view, but certainly not an animal to be trifled with in the wrong circumstances. So again, because of this body of water, it's really quite cool to be able to see animals like elephants actually swimming across the river, using their trunk as a snorkel. So yeah, something quite special and not something that's that easy to see within South Africa. Certainly if you go up into other parts of Africa where you've got major rivers, but in South Africa this is quite unique. And then you also get some of the other little special chaps. This is a civet, often incorrectly referred to as a civet cat. It's not a cat. It's part of what are known as the mustelids, so has a scent gland, which much like things like your skunks would have. And so another little animal that's potentially, it's nocturnal. So that's why it's being, this was photographed under spotlight. And then another really cool animal, again, often of these more dry areas, nocturnal, seen both at Madikwe and at Marataba. So this is one of our African porcupines, our largest rodent, and yeah, was just quite fortunate to catch this one just as the spotlight hit it. Just managed to get one photograph of it. So you can see those beautiful quills. They cannot shoot their quills. That's a myth. The way that quills get stuck into something is that the porcupine's way of defense is reversing into something and then stick. The quills very easily detach, and then they get left in the unfortunate skin of whatever animal tried to take it. So yeah, possibility in these areas to see porcupines. Squirrels are quite ubiquitous. I happen to love our squirrels, partly because I'm based in Zululand when I'm not doing this work, and we don't get squirrels down there. So yeah, just really fun, cheeky little rodents who are amazing alarm givers. If you ever hear a squirrel alarming, there's a good chance that you've got something like a leopard in the area, because they make this funny little sound, and they stamp their little feet and wag their tail up and down. And so if you see that, it's always worth stopping to look. Is it a snake? Is there a predator? Is there a raptor? But there's very possibly something. So yeah, they're quite good at giving the game away. So in this area, they do have spotted hyenas. So this is a young spotted hyena. Again, possibly seen in the other reserves, but this photograph was actually taken in Marataba. Also, some of the big cats. So this beautiful male lion was photographed there. Other animals, part of the big five that people often want to see. So this is a Cape buffalo. So the term big five is actually an old hunting term. and it referred to the 5 most dangerous animals to hunt, which included lion, leopard, buffalo, elephant, and black rhinoceros. Because black rhinos are so rarely seen, there's only 5,000 left in the world, it's become, as a tourist kind of way of looking at the big 5, we've also included white rhinos as part of the big 5. I haven't included rhinos in any of these, simply because they're so threatened. We try not to advertise too much about them. So yeah, that's pretty much why I have many photographs of rhinos in these places, but just I haven't included them here. And then you always have the possibility in Africa of getting truly stunning sunsets, especially in the winter months, which is when these safaris are more common because it's drier, the bush is thinner, so you have better game viewing. And because of all the dust in the atmosphere, you get these beautiful red sunsets. And then the final property that we go to, which borders on the famous Kruger National Park, is Marula Game Reserve. So Marula is this section of green all the way down the western side of the eastern side of the map here. So Marula was actually proclaimed in 1930 as a game reserve, and it was the first privately owned and commercially operated game reserve in South Africa. So a lot of these areas prior to that were hunting, and it was Mike Rattray and the Rattray family who decided that it would become a photographic or a tourism destination, not a hunting destination. And so since the 1930s, no hunting has taken place here. So the animals here are really, really very habituated to vehicles. They don't associate vehicles with being hunted or threatened in any way. So this is a 33,000 acre property, but it borders onto the Kruger National Park, the Sabi Sands, which in total gives the animals the possibility of accessing over 2 million hectares. So massive areas that these animals have. What's special about Marula is that it has 12 miles, 19 kilometers of the Sand River. And in the height of winter, not in a normal year when it's really dry, this is the primary water source for many animals in the area, which make it an extremely high game viewing destination. Interestingly, this year we had a much wetter winter, and it remained green for a lot longer, but nonetheless, still incredible animal sightings. So just to show you the landscape here, it has a very different geology. You can see a few of the sort of rounded boulders in the foreground here, which are all granite. Gives rise to a much more sandy soil with clay aggregating down in the valleys. So you get different trees, much larger trees very often because there's a lot more water. So these were just 2 sunrise pictures taken over the Sand River. It was quite a misty morning, especially the one on the left-hand side of the screen. So again, just to show you this sort of much more grey rock, which is typical of granite, large trees, and then obviously quite green, and then with the Sand River flowing through it. So one of the antelope that you have the potential to see at Marula that doesn't occur at the other 2 reserves is this antelope. This is an Inyala. This is a male. I'm not sure if I included a picture of a female. The females look very different, but a very majestic antelope, has these lovely orange socks on, and then this mane or crest down its back, which when it's displaying dominance to other males, it sort of raises this in a very pronounced crest, and then does this very bizarre looking stiff-legged walk, which is part of a dominance display. So only occur in these moister eastern portions of the country. Don't see them up in the more dry, arid west of the country. So another animal, a very, very special animal, is the African wild dog, sometimes referred to as the painted wolf. One of our most critically endangered carnivores, because it was pretty much persecuted, hunted. You can't keep wild dogs very easily inside fences. They break out, and if there's areas of farmland, they will go and kill livestock. And so they were heavily persecuted for many, many decades. And so not easy to see. And Madikwe has some wild dogs, Marataba has none, and then Mala Mala have. They're never a guaranteed sighting anywhere because they are such mobile animals. So the best chance is if they do have a den and they have pups, then that is your best chance of seeing them. But certainly one of the specials that are possible to see on the safari. And then one of the real specials of Mala Mala are their leopards. So there are multi-generations of leopard that have been habituated simply by there being vehicles that have treated them and their cubs with respect. And so these animals will come incredibly close to vehicles, highly curious, or just completely nonchalant, and they'll just walk past the vehicle and just not even look at you. So on most safaris, the chances of seeing a leopard are extremely low because they're solitary and very shy. On this safari, because of how long Mala Mala has been a reserve and the relationship it has with its leopards, there is a good chance of seeing leopards at Mala Mala on this safari. So this photograph was taken on a recent safari. This is a cub of one of the females known as the Saboya female. She has 2 cubs. And so mom was present. So normally with cubs this young, you wouldn't view them in the absence of mum because it puts them under stress and pressure, which you don't want to do. But mum was there, and yeah, the two cubs gave us quite a show. So if you have a look at both pictures, actually, just have a look at how long the whiskers are on these animals. They're actually known as vibrissae, and they are the widest part of any leopard. And so those are the sensory organs that allow a leopard to feel how wide a space is. And if whatever the width is that those whiskers detect, then a leopard will know that it can get through that space. So yeah, very much longer than any of a lion or a cheetah or any other cat for that matter. Couple of other specials. One of my most recent safaris would probably tell you that when the guide gets overexcited, it starts behaving strangely, that it's probably something quite rare. And this is an African ground hornbill, highly threatened, a very special bird to see, and another bird not frequently seen. Possible to see at other reserves, but they have a good population, a growing population, which is great to hear at Mala Mala. And this one I just took because it photobombed. So these are 2 waterbuck. Again, animals you find in these more moist areas. As their name suggests, they tend to run towards water when they are threatened, and they need to drink daily. And these 2 males were having a tussle. And yeah, the southern ground hornbill decided that it was going to photobomb the fight. So I haven't included the whole myriad of birds and other creatures that are possible to see. But I thought this little guy was quite cute. This is a flat-necked chameleon, and occurs across all areas, but quite a lot easier to see in areas where you've got quite a high moisture content, especially you find them at night with the spotlight. They're a different color green to the surrounding vegetation, so they're actually much easier to spot at night than they are during the day. So yeah, a little flat-necked chameleon. This was just another wild dog picture, just sort of what big ears you have. One raptor that's very special, again, quite endangered. This is a bateleur, or a short-tailed eagle. Has this majestic coloration, which it only develops after about the first 5 or 6 years of life. So when it's in its juvenile coloration, it's this very drab brown bird. But when it gets to maturation, it turns into this beautiful bird with this bright red bill and feet. So really beautiful. And then something I've only ever seen a couple of times in my guiding career, and the last one was at Marula. This is a Cape clawless otter. So yeah, not frequently seen, but there's a possibility. And for me, that's also what makes safari so special, is what is the unexpected, what's going to just pop out and give you a surprise. So related to a Komodo dragon, this is what's known as a water monitor. So a very large lizard with a very obviously forked tongue. I think it stuck its tongue in the grass here. But yeah, just another interesting animal that you get to see, as well as your more typical mammal and bird species. This was just a particularly grumpy looking buffalo. I always think that they look at you as though you owe them money. So this is a big old male buffalo, which you not infrequently see down by the Sand River wallowing. Zebras occur at all the reserves and are one of the most photogenic, I think, of all of the animals that are possible to see on safari. And then this is the Drakensberg Mountains in the far background. This was one of the sunsets that we had at Marula. So yeah, just another beautiful African sunset. And a last sunset, this one was taken at Marataba on the river. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I hope that gave you some insight into South Africa's savanna and what secluded South African safari looks like.
Lorraine, thank you so much. That just looks like an incredible trip. We do have some questions.
Okay.
Is Madikwe all fenced in?
So yes, so both Madikwe and Marataba have a perimeter fence. The reason for that is obviously cities, towns have encroached into animal spaces globally. And so whether it's to keep the animals in or to keep the humans out is a matter of debate. But yes, these reserves are fenced. I mean, ultimately, even the Kruger National Park and the Sabi Sands do have a boundary fence. It's just a much, much bigger area. But these are still, all of these are still really quite large properties, but yes, they are fenced.
Mm-hmm. The wild dog has such long, thin legs. Is this for running in tall grasses?
So possibly for tall grasses, but just that whole physique that a wild dog has, it's what we know or call a cursorial predator. And so cursorial predators actually chase down their prey, and they just keep running after their prey until they're exhausted. And so it has this very, very ergonomic design. And part of that are those very long, slender legs, which just allow it to just keep running for long distances.
Mm. And are wild dogs coming back? Are they still persecuted by farmers?
So unfortunately, yes, they are still persecuted by farmers. There has been, I think, we have made some inroads into being able to protect them better. So very often now in areas where there's a potential for them to break out, we put radio tracking, we put collars on them so that they can be, you can have a satellite collar, GPS collar, so that you can find them. We know that reserves that are, and sorry, this is in hectares, but we know that reserves smaller than 50,000 hectares are not suitable for dogs because they need huge areas. So there's a wild dog action group, WAG, which does a lot of work to try and protect them and also educate people. So I think we have made some progress, but it's not to say that they don't still, if they get into communities on the borders of parks, there is still the possibility that they get snared or shot. But I think we have made progress, certainly in South Africa in the last decade.
Got it. What do water monitors eat?
So water monitors will pretty much take anything they can overpower. So they'll eat other small reptiles. You'll quite frequently see them looking for eggs. So they'll actually go for things like crocodile eggs, and yeah, other reptiles. You might even find, I mean, if they come across, nestlings or things like that, that they'll take those. So interestingly, like Komodo dragons, they actually belong to a venom clade. So whilst they're not highly venomous, they do have a venom. And so, yeah, they're quite, especially water monitors. So we also have rock monitors, but water monitors are really quite ferocious. And they'll also eat things like, I mean, if they can get fish, they'll take them, frogs, toads. So yeah, they have quite a kind of wide diet.
Interesting. Are old buffaloes forced out of the herd so that they end their days in solitude?
Yes. So essentially what happens is, particularly the old bulls, they get to a point where they can't keep up with the rest of the herd. And so they kind of leave the herd and go into areas, because what happens is their teeth wear down, their skin or their fur gets thin, so they can't chew grass as well as they used to, and they need mud to protect them from biting flies. And so what they'll do is they'll move into these areas that are closer to rivers or water, and we call them dugger boys. And so dugger is a Zulu word for mud. And it's because they roll in the mud to cool themselves, to stop them being bitten. And then they hang out in groups. I mean, you'll find solitary ones, but sometimes a group of 5 or 6. And yeah, they hang out in these areas. They're extremely dangerous on foot because they have lost the protection of the herd. And so the best form of defense is attack. And so, yeah, solitary dugger boys can be quite challenging on foot. I mean, there's no danger from them in vehicles, but yeah, they deserve healthy respect.
Hmm. All right, one more question. What types of snakes inhabit the area, and are they hunted by mongoose?
So there's a wide variety of snakes that inhabit all of these areas. So, I mean, we have a variety of non-venomous and venomous snakes. And yes, absolutely, they are hunted by mongoose. So all mongoose species will pretty much try to take snakes. So it's not specific to any one of the species. But I mean, we get everything from Mozambique spitting cobras to puff adders, to completely harmless variegated bush snakes. So in the winter months when we go on safari, very often they are estivating. It's too cold, so they don't come out. So we don't necessarily see snakes often, but they are around.
Interesting. Well, thank you again. That was such a beautiful presentation. There's lots of comments in my feed, just really appreciating your beautiful photography. So thank you for treating us to such a feast of information and beauty. I'm going to pass that back to you for closing comments.
Well, thanks very much, Sunny. It's a real pleasure to be able to share. Yeah, it's a continent that I was born on and that I love very much. And so, yeah, it's a real pleasure to be able to share it with people.
Thank you again. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in. Please join us again tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, we'll conclude the webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.